Okay, hello everybody. So today we're moving into a new topic of discussion, and that is box and whisker plots. And so what you see in front of you is actually a box and whisker plot. And what box and whisker plots are used to do is they are used to help you visualize data that you might have in regards to a certain subject. And it helps you understand how that data is distributed across a number line. And so this particular box and whisker plot is a generic one. It doesn't actually show any numbers in it, but we need to talk about what some of the aspects of a box and whisker plot are and how or what they're called and then how to find them. So what you see here, typically box and whisker plots are going to have five different points. You'll see a point right here, a point right here, right there, and right there. So you can see there's five. Now, the first point and the last point that I showed you are pretty easy, and they are simply the minimum, in this case, the smallest value that you have of a set of data. And then this is the biggest value you have of a set of data. As an example, you could have a set of data for all the ages of students that are in the one of your lunch periods, for instance. And so what you would most likely see is you'd see the majority of your data in the middle because most students are going to be around the same age if they're in the lunchroom, but you might have a student that's a little bit younger, or you might have a student that's a little bit older than everybody else. So this again is called a box and whisker plot, and the first point you see here is the minimum value of your data, and this would be your maximum value of your data. Now, there are three other points here, and those 3 points are a little trickier to find. They're not just a matter of identifying them from the data. You actually have to do a little bit of work. So let's talk about those three. First one, this one right smack in the middle, that is called the median. And what the median is it is the middle number. So if you took all of your data points that you have and you ordered them least to greatest, the median would be the one that you find right smack in the middle. Okay, so the next value that you would need to look at, and these are, I'm going to kind of talk about them both in at the same time, but they are the lower quartile, which is this first one, and then the upper quartile, which is the second one right there. Now, what they are is they are actually the median of your lower half and upper half of data. So as an example, if you had a bunch of numbers and you cut those numbers in half, and then you found the middle of what is left. That is what this is. That's called the lower quartile. And the same goes for here. If I cut my data in half and then I found the middle number of the upper part of my data, this is called the upper quartile. So if that confuses you a little bit, we will, in just a few minutes here, show you how to find them. And it's probably a little bit easier to understand when we're actually working with numbers. Now, there's two other aspects of a box and whisker plot that we need to be aware of. The first is called what is called the interquartile range. So the interquartile range is just simply the distance that it is from the lower quartile to the upper quartile. And the way that you find the distance is you would simply subtract those. So as an example, if this number was 20 and this number was 50, if you did 50 minus 20, you would get 30, and that would be your interquartile range. Now, the last aspect of a box and whisker plot we're going to discuss before we actually try one is what the actual range of your data is. And the range is very simple. The range is how spread out your data is, and it's very easy to find. You take the maximum value and you take the minimum value and then you subtract. So as you can see, it says that right here, maximum minus minimum. So now that we've talked about some aspects of a box and whisker plot, let's go ahead and try a problem. So here is a particular box and whisker plot, and this is a box or whisker plot of daily flight departures. And it says find the following for the box and whisker plot above. So first they want you to find or identify the median. So the median is going to be the middle number, and it will occur at the point that is somewhere inside the box. So in this case, the median is right there. So our median value would be 20. Now, number 2 asks you to find the lower quartile. Now, the lower quartile is the beginning of the box. So in this case, right there would be the lower quartile, and you can see that would give us a value of 10. The next one asks us to find the upper quartile, and the upper quartile is the end of the box if you're reading the box left to right. So right there is what's called the upper quartile. And so that value is right smack in the middle of 50 and 60, which means it is 55. Now, IQR stands for interquartile range. Now, the interquartile range is found by subtracting the upper quartile and your lower quartile. And so in this case, the upper quartile was 55 and the lower quartile was 10. So we will do 55 minus 10, which gives us a total of 45 for our interquartile range. Now, the last two are probably the easiest to find. They are simply the minimum and the maximum value, and they occur on the whiskers, at the end of those whiskers. So here is the whisker, and remember, this is the box part. So the minimum value is right there, and you can see that that is 5. And the maximum value is right here, and you can see that is 60. So for our minimum, it's 5, and the maximum is 60. And now we have all of our parts to practice part number 1 filled out. So I am going to do one more problem with you today. And this is practice problem number 2. And it would like you to find the following for the box and whisker plots above. So it says, what percent of weekly car sales were 14 and less? So first we have to identify where the number 14 is. Here's 12 and here's 16. Halfway in between that's going to be 14. So right there is 14. I'm going to go ahead and label this as 14. Now, here's the thing that you have to understand about box and whisker plots, and I did not show you this when I originally introduced them. Box and whisker plots are broken up, or it breaks the data up into 4 basically equal chunks. So you have each 1/4 of each of the data is here. So here is 1/4 of your data, here is 1/4 of your data, here is 1/4 of your data, and then here is 1/4 of your data. So each of those chunks, this represents 1/4, this is 1/4, this is 1/4, and all of that represents 1/4. Each of those chunks, each half of the box and each whisker, represent 1/4 of all the points. Now what you see is the length, how long it is from here to here versus here to here, shows you how spread out our data is. And so what they're asking us for in this first example is, or this first problem is, they would like to know what percent of weekly car sales were 14 and less. So when they refer to that, they're talking about this much and this. And so they want to know what percent of the weekly car sales were 14 and less. Well, what you should be able to see is that we started at the median, or the middle number, which is 14. So if we're starting at the middle and going all the way to one side, we should realize that that is half of all of our data. So because they're talking about half of all of our data, that would be 50% of all of the data. Now it asks me for what percent of weekly car sales were 20 or less. So if I go back and look at my data again, if I start at 20, which is right here, that's the maximum value. And then I go less, I end up highlighting all of our box and whisker plot, all of it, all the points are highlighted there. So it says what percent of weekly car sales were 20 or less? Well, because we highlighted all of the entire graph, that would be 100% of the data. And another way to look at this as where we said this chunk right here is 1/4, which is 25%. This chunk from here to here is 25%. This chunk from here to here is 25%. And then this last chunk from here to here is also 25%. So our data is broken up into 4 chunks. Now it says what percent of weekly car sales were 16 or more? So we need to figure out where 16 is. And you can see that 16 starts right here and they want more. So how much of our data is highlighted? In this case, 25% of our data was highlighted. Now, the last question I'm going to go over today is what percent of weekly car sales were between 12 and 16? So let's go back and look at that for a second. Between 12 and 16 would put us right here, 12 and 16. So we are highlighting the entire box in the center. That is called the interquartile range. The interquartile range represents 50% of our data. Half of the data will be inside those boxes. You can see 25% plus another 25%. So our answer here would be what percent of weekly car sales were between 12 and 16, and it would encompass 50%. So there you go. There's a quick overview of what a box and whisker plot is. This is the first of a couple videos I'm going to make. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a great day.